episode of the CE Deploy training series. Today we're going to cover the macro factory. The macro factory has become a popular feature very quickly since it has been difficult historically to manage macros on endpoints without creating your own code. So this has certainly helped engineers get more comfortable with deploying macros and then managing them on their endpoints. So before I go into a long-winded description of what exactly it is, I'll show you instead. But today, the macro factory is actually available for local and cloud. And other than the actual way that you load the devices into the macro factory, they are functionally the same. They use the same commands to run, just the method of which that you send the commands to either the cloud or directly to the device is different. So, but for all intensive purposes, all the features are exactly identical between the cloud and local. There's no difference. So today we're going to focus on the cloud though. And we're going to start, I'm going to load my token for the cloud. And then I'm going to load my org ID. I'm actually going to download all the devices in my org, which is 5 video devices and then 1 Webex share. The Webex share won't show up though, because obviously it can't run macros, but we'll see that in action. So now it's just a matter of clicking on the macro factory button and launching the macro factory. It does take a little while to load the initial endpoints, but once it's loaded, the refreshes of the data is pretty quick because I'm only refreshing the actual devices that you're changing. So it does make the refresh relatively quick, and we'll see that. So this is the macro factory. You'll notice a couple of things here. So the ID of the system is actually used as an indexer, and so therefore that's why that is there, but it's also a handy reference as well if you're looking for the device ID of your device. The system name, obviously, with a couple of features here we'll get to in a second, and then the macros themselves. And what you'll notice is there will be a red or green dot next to the macros, and that's to indicate whether there is an active macro or not. So we'll get started we'll go from left to right here on what all these different buttons do, and we'll start with the view. So the view is kind of interesting. It actually provides a real-time view of the macro, the actual code on your device. So I just loaded the macro, and from here we can actually make edits. And so what I'll do is I'll just remove a space, and then I will update this macro. So it's asking me if I want to update the macro. I'll just say yes. And it goes ahead and it updates the macro. This might take a few seconds, and then it responds back. Your macro has been updated. And what we'll do is to prove that it actually has updated the macro. This was where the space was. I'll close the macro, and then I'll relaunch it, and it'll download a clean copy of the macro, and you'll see that the space is gone. So what we'll do is we'll add the space back, we'll update it again, and update the macro, yes. It takes a few seconds. It's a fairly large macro, this one. And then we will get back, your macro has been updated. Alright, so you can update from here. We can also copy the code. So this will actually copy it into our clipboard. And if we want to paste it into a different editor, we can do that. Or we can actually download the code. So if I click download, it'll give me the option of what the actual macro name is, and it'll automatically put it in there as save as. And we can pick a folder here, and we can go save. And it'll actually save a copy of your macro. Alright, so let's close that and move on to the next one. So we have activate now, and so what we can do is we can actually activate a deactivated macro. So if I go in here and I select the Babel Labs one here, and I hit activate, and it gives you a warning. It says you're about to activate the macros. I'll click yes. And then you'll actually get some information here about what's happening. the table gets refreshed with new data. Now the only data that's actually changed here is the actual endpoint that we updated, and you can see that the activity bubble has gone from red to green. Right, so let's go back and we'll deactivate this again. So we'll deactivate, and it's back to red. So now we've covered activate and deactivate. Now what we'll do is we'll actually add a new macro. So to add a macro, we have to select the actual system name and click add. We can select one of these other ones here, but it makes really no difference, but we'll just select the actual name of the endpoint here because this actually has no macros associated with it. So we'll click add, and we'll choose this dialpad macro and click open. You're about to add the dialpad macro to your endpoint, so select yes, and it'll go off and it'll add the macro to the endpoint. You see the data refresh, and now we see the actual dialpad macro there in a deactivated state. So I do not activate the macro when you add it as new to an endpoint. So now if you wanted to activate it, you would select it and then select the activate button. In this case, what we'll do is we'll actually restart the macro engine. So we'll go restart the macro engine, select yes. And then if we actually click on the status of the system, you can see that we restarted the macro engine here. But we have no macros actually active. So therefore the running status will be false. So you can see it actually gives you status of actual running macros as well as all the macro logs. And we can actually show all. So we can show all the available messages. Okay, so now if we go back here, we can actually activate. We'll activate it. Say yes. We're going to activate our macro, and then we're going to go back to the status. We could have refreshed the status, but we wanted to go activate it, and we'll go all. And then if I scroll down, you can actually see the macro has actually loaded into the status, and our engine is true. When we activate the macro, I perform an engine restart at the same time. So you'll always see the macro come up and be active once you hit the activate button. Okay. From here, let's now remove this dialpad macro. We don't really need it, so we can remove it. And now it's gone. So as you can see, the data refreshes really quickly because we're only refreshing the actual endpoints we're changing. So, training session here with the macro factory. The final feature here I want to cover is the ability to compare two macros. So in our case, we have two macros here on desktop devices on let's see, a DX80 and also a Desk Pro, and we want to compare them. And this is a Babel Labs macro that automatically turns on the Babel Labs noise suppression every time a call is started, but for some reason there's a little bit of a difference here. We want to check it out. Maybe one's not working and one is. So let's just do a quick comparison. So now I've selected both. I just press the view, launches, and you can see here one has an extra space, so not a big deal, but still highlights the differences between the two macros. So if you're having issues with one macro and you want to compare it to another one to see if there's any sort of if there's any sort of command errors or anything in there, you can come in here and you can actually do a direct comparison between two macros. And so that wraps up our training session here on the Macro Factory. Feel free to reach out to me in the space anytime, and thanks for watching.